In the early 1900s, the Minnesota River Valley became a hotbed for developing sulfur springs into medicinal resorts. 3 resorts were built, one near Shakopee and 2 near Jordan. Other sulfur springs may have been discovered earlier, but the one near Shakopee was developed in 1908. Despite the fact that it used Shakopee in its name, it was actually located across the Minnesota River in Carver County. Although it was not a big city, Shakopee was close to the cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. Multiple railroads ran from the Twin Cities to the Chaska and Shakopee area. This was also the dawn of the automobile age, so in time, more people would use automobiles to travel. So what was the big deal with sulfur? At that time, sulfur was used to treat arthritis and a multitude of other issues. People afflicted with these problems could get sulfur mud baths, take sulfur water baths, drink the sulfur water, have massages, or get electric shock therapy. The Shakopee Mineral Springs Company was formed in 1908, led by Dr. Henry Fisher. Dr. Fisher had been a medical doctor in Shakopee since 1894. Dr. Tinus Larson was also involved in the Shakopee Consortium, and in time would be involved in both Jordan companies as well. In order to raise the funds necessary to build the Shakopee complex, shares in the company were sold. Once this occurred, the new $35,000 sanitarium was built. Initially, the complex title included the word swastika, but remember, this was way before World War II. Eventually, the complex became the Mudcura Sanitarium. The new sanitarium advertised all over the state about its advantages. Since most people still rode trains, a trip to the new Shakopee Mudcura Sanitarium would start at the local depot. This is the St. Paul Union Depot. Here they would board the train for the ride to Shakopee. It would have been a beautiful train ride back then, traveling along the Minnesota River Valley and its majestic bluffs. If coming from the Twin Cities, the first notable feature you would pass is Fort Snelling. After that, farming scenes became more common. Pretty soon the railroad would round a bend, and the town of Shakopee would emerge from the lush landscape. St. Mark's Catholic Church dominated the Shakopee skyline, like a lighthouse to passing ships. From Shakopee, guests were driven to the Mudcura Sanitarium, which was an elegant building. The new building was designed by A. Clausen and opened in July 1909. The Mudcura Sanitarium was like a spa and wellness center. It featured a hotel, restaurant, activities for the guests, and the needed treatments for the patients. To accomplish these tasks, doctors, nurses, therapists, and a big support staff was required. Many of these people lived on site. The patients could stay anywhere from a day to several weeks of time. A later picture of the Mudcura Sanitarium shows how it was a complex of buildings. Dr. Fisher built his own home there as well. The sanitarium covered expansive grounds for the guests to explore. Running water, graveled walking paths, and bridges were designed for the guests to check out. Being along the Minnesota River bluffs, the scenery was very picturesque. The Mudcura Sanitarium also featured a lagoon for the guests to fish, boat, or canoe. They also built a concrete bottle attraction into their sulfur spring, which was pretty unique. Mudcura also featured its own Holstein herd, which produced all the milk and cream used on site. It also had a poultry flock for eggs and chicken, fresh pork, beef and veal, and a large garden for fresh vegetables. It was an independent enterprise. Dr. Fisher enjoyed raising stock. One of his Holstein cows, Princess Aggie, set a world record for milk production. In 1920, he purchased a purebred Holstein bull, the Duke, for $33,000. Dr. Fisher died in Shakopee in 1940. Sulphur Springs were also discovered at Jordan, Minnesota. Jordan was just a little further southwest of Shakopee, still well within reach of the Twin Cities. The Jordan Sulphur Springs Company was one of 2 Jordan companies that took advantage of their sulfur springs. James J. Leonard was associated for a number of years with this company. Also of note is Dr. Tinus M. Larson, who had also been associated with Mudcura at Shakopee. The Jordan Sulphur Springs Company erected another beautiful brick building at its location. This was a 3-story building which opened in June 1912. They soon began to advertise their services as well. The Jordan Sulphur Springs Company also had a baseball team, which beat a team from Fort Snelling in 1918. James J. Leonard died in Scott County in 1922, and Dr. Tinus M. Larson died in St. Paul in 1956. This is a photograph of Dr. Larson. The third Sulphur Springs Sanitarium was updated in 1911 at Jordan. This business was called the Mudbaden Sulphur Springs Company. The springs were discovered on Ole Rosendaal's farm. Dr. Tinus Larson must have quit the Mudcura at Shakopee to help start this business. As mentioned previously, Dr. Larson was involved in all 3 enterprises. Mudbaden was probably the best advertiser of the 3 businesses. It advertised heavily in local newspapers. One of its perks was being right next to 2 railroads. They also came up with catchy advertisements as well. If they could capture your attention, you might come to their facility. Finally, Mudbaden also had a trademark, which featured their name and an eagle. The Minnesota River Valley could be seen in the background, with the town of Jordan on the right. The complex and its steam or sulfur was visible in the middle. The Mudbaden buildings featured sun porches, a parlor, multiple dining rooms, and several wings. The main building opened in 1912. They built a station on the railroad which is located right in front of their building. The stop was called Mudbaden Station. Since Mudbaden and the Jordan Sulphur Springs were located next to each other, they were often confused with each other. The Jordan Sulphur Springs thought it was unfair that Mudbaden built a station on the railroad, and they didn't have one. That dispute ended up in a fight with the Railroad Commission. As patients got off the train, it was a short walk to the main Mudbaden building. This building was very fancy and official looking. Inside there was a main lounging room, or lobby, with a fireplace on the end. This is another look at that room. The main dining room was very fancy with white tablecloths and a bar. This is another look at the dining room. An orchestra was also employed, at times, to add to the ambience. This is a postcard of some of the staff at Mudbaden, including Dr. Tinus Larson on the left. This is what the Mudbaden mudroom looked like. Patients were covered in sulfur mud, which was a pretty messy process. Patients could also get massages or other treatments. And remember, they could drink the sulfur mineral water. The Mudbaden grounds were also quite extensive with beautiful lawns and trees. A special fountain at the front of the building greeted the guests. There were several wings where people and staff were boarded. Guests and staff could walk around the grounds on various paths, and one of the sulfur springs featured gazebos. It must have been an interesting job to be one of the people who mined the sulfur mud. Dr. Tinus Larson also built a home on the Mudbaden complex. He would eventually resign and move over to the Jordan Sulphur Springs Company. Ole Rosendahl died in Minneapolis in 1932. The Mudbaden building still stands today and has been put on the National Register of Historic Places. That concludes the video. Please check out my websites at mnbricks.com and chaskabrick.com.